So as you can see, I'm going to be presenting a talk called Exploring User Turning Perception and Comfort of the Segment Edition Redirected Walking Technique. I'm Linda Krueger. My co-authors are Ralf, Bierig, and Charles Markham, and I'm from Maynooth University in Ireland. So within virtual reality, we want people to feel as immersed as they possibly can in these massive virtual worlds. We want them to feel like they're really, really there. But we've got this problem of we have limited physical space for them to actually move within, right? We've got this tiny space and we've got this massive virtual world. We want people to move as naturally as possible. We want them to walk like they would actually walk in the real world. We don't want this like in-between layer of buttons. We want them to just move like they would naturally move. So we've got this really immersive method of interacting, real walking, but we've got this limitation on space. We can't have people walking 10 meters in one direction and hitting a wall. So how do we make it so that we can walk in this smaller space and then walk naturally in this bigger virtual world at the same time? So this introduces the concept of redirected walking, where we want people to move inside the smaller space. So there's two fundamental types of redirected walking, two approaches. There's gain manipulation, which means we change how the user moves inside the virtual environment. They might move a meter in the real world, but we're going to move them 2 meters in the virtual world. They might be turning 45 degrees inside the real space, but we're going to turn them 60 degrees in the real space. And below a certain threshold, people don't notice this change. So we can add a little bit more like space, so to speak, in the tracking space just by creating these little gains. However, there's a limitation. After a while, people notice. If you make the change too big, people find it unsettling, and eventually they'll find it immersion breaking. There'll be a break in presence. Then we have the alternative technique called environment manipulation. Now, instead of changing how the user moves inside the virtual space, we're going to change the virtual space around the user. So, oh, well, there's space here for a wall in the real space, so we'll just add a wall in the virtual space. Or there's a door here that leads to a corner. Well, we'll change where the door is when they're not looking. And most people will not notice these changes below a certain level. And similar to this gain manipulation, it's always below a certain threshold. The problem with environment manipulation is you need things in the way. You need them to turn away to be able to change something. They won't notice if a change is happening in a separate room, but they'll absolutely notice if the room they're in starts getting bigger or smaller while they're in it. So now we come to the new method of redirected walking called segment addition. It uses both approaches. It uses ideas from both approaches, from game manipulation and from environment manipulation together. So what it does is it changes aspects of the environment that the user is not looking at. So outside the field of view of the user, we're going to add parts to the space, and then they're going to move further as a result. So you can see here the overview of the steps of segment addition. This is from a top-down view, so we're looking at what is happening from a bird's eye view above the user. So in the beginning, we can see there's A there that they're looking at and B, which they want to turn towards. And right now it's 180 degrees apart, right? They need to turn a half turn to get there. Well, when they start turning, we're going to, outside their field of view, add slices. So you can see in step 3, we're going to add parts to the environment as they are turning. And that means they have to turn further because the goal also moves to compensate for this. So the goal now is further away than it was in this loop. So as they continue turning, we continue adding slices. And then eventually, in step 6, they start looking at the goal. So they have reached their goal, but they have turned more than 180 degrees to reach their goal. So once they've reached their goal, we need to change the environment so it still stays back the way it was before, right? So before we had the goals 180 degrees apart. So once they have turned enough, we're going to say, okay, they've reached their goal. So now we're going to do it so the goals are once again 180 degrees apart. So we're going to hide all those extra slices, remove them, And then in the last part, you can see in part 8, the relative position of the goals and all the parts is the same again, even though they have turned more than 180 degrees in the interim. So then, since this is a new technique, we created a user study based on it, and we compared it to a more simple technique. So we came up with moving goalposts, and all moving goalposts does, it moves the goals in the environment. So you can see here, the goals themselves shift, so the user has to turn more, but all the other elements, like the little gray dots, they stay the same. So the relative position of the other things in the environment does not change. So we came up with a user study with 29 participants, and you can see here they start by looking at this blue goal in the distance, and then they're turning through this kind of forest environment. And then when they finish the turn, so when they look at the other goal, we give them a little menu that asks them a few questions. So we ask, did this turn feel bigger or smaller than a half turn, 180 degrees? We ask them, did the turn feel pleasant? Did it feel natural? And are you comfortable with the system? And that's after every turn. And then once they have finished that turn and finished the questions, they move on to the next turn. Users can turn in either direction, it doesn't matter. The system just allows for that. We do suggest users don't always turn in the same direction repeatedly, because that can just cause dizziness. Oh yes, and of the two methods, so half the people saw the segment addition technique first, followed by moving goalposts, and the other half thought the other way around. So they saw moving goalposts first and then segment addition. So going to our results, we came to the conclusion that users did notice large changes. So if you added 4 or 5 segments, users are going to notice that the turn is greater than 180 degrees. But despite that, they don't really know how it's changing, especially with segment addition. They don't know what is changing about the environment. They just know they feel like they're turning more or they feel like they're turning less. So it's subtle in its mechanism, even if they notice the change in amount. And then we looked at the average comfort, naturalness, and usability scores, and throughout all of them, they remained high. So when the turn was a half turn, people found it very natural. When the turn was bigger than a half turn, they still found it natural. And even when it was smaller than a half turn, they still found it natural, and same with usable and pleasant. And then you can see here on the left, there's the comfort score as well, which shows you that on average, the comfort scores were high. It's on a Likert scale from 1 to 7. So the highest people could give is 7, and they're averaging between 5 and 6 for comfort scores, and similar 5 and 6 for naturalness scores. You can see like a slight drop off on the very edges. But this is very promising as a result, because it suggests that you can add a lot to this environment while still people feel natural and comfortable within it. That's the key things. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, we have many questions. Yes.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Really cool study. I was wondering whether you believe that the success of adding the segments depends on the environment, because it looked like the environment you used didn't really have a lot of like spatial cues.
True.
So just a forest. If it would be in a room with other elements, with other points of reference, do you think it would still work?
So I think it depends on the environment, like you said, which is true for most environment manipulation techniques, right? Most of them work indoors, so we can use these other techniques to work well in these highly structured environments that already have a bunch of walls or things to hide. What this is good for is when it's like large, empty, open spaces like this one, or a football field, or like a desert. So it's basically filling this niche of where these other manipulation techniques aren't working. So you could use this in conjunction with those other techniques for more cluttered spaces. But yes, it absolutely does. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm wondering what the design, the impact on design is. So do designers of environments that will use segment addition have to take something into consideration? Is it, how do you design?
Yeah,
for this?
so it's early stages right now. So we've done our first research studies, promising results, but there's no like easy mechanism to introduce it yet. So there's no like global framework because it is a new technique. So right now, yes, designers would have to consider, is this the right environment? So like I was saying, good open spaces, brilliant for this technique. Closed indoor spaces, maybe try something else. And especially if you want users who are like prone to simulator sickness, this is a great alternative to gain, for example. Or if you've got users who you want to move a lot in quite a small space, this is also really good because again, people feel it's very natural even when they're moving a large amount. But yeah, designers should take into account it's for wide open spaces where there's limited stuff inside it.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. Very, very, it's fascinating actually, because I'm into VR as well, and this is
Brilliant.
the actual problem we always have. But as a designer, what I would suggest, if you want to integrate it in another study or whatnot, I would love to see it in a context where this technique is incorporated. It's not hidden. It's incorporated in the actual design of the level. So you play, and this is part of the narrative. This is part of a world
Interesting.
where the changes happen because it's a surreal world, fantasy world, I don't know what, and the people, the players are aware of that, and you turn it into basically not only a navigation mechanic, but a game mechanic.
Yeah, you could make it almost a puzzle game at that point, being
Precisely.
like, how do you turn this way?
Yeah,
Really cool,
sorry,
yeah.
that was my comment. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.